Hello and welcome to Talk to Downtown. My name is Courtney Wood. I'm the Economic Development Director for the Downtown Stockton Alliance, which is a 501c6 nonprofit property-based business improvement district serving downtown Stockton. This webinar series is intended to connect our business owners, property owners, visitors, and residents with the organizations, people, and resources who can help them address issues which are of top concern to them. Today, we have special guest, Matt Diaz. He is the Advanced Planning Manager at the City of Stockton. I'm excited to talk to him today about some important updates going on in his department at the city. And we'll begin by having Matt share a little bit more about his background, his role at the City of Stockton, the work that he's doing. Then I will go ahead and ask him a list of questions I've outlined for him. And at the end, we'll have time for a few viewer questions. So if you do have questions, please type them in as a comment. And with that, welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for being our guest today. I'm excited to talk to you and learn more about what you're doing. Please give us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your role at the city.
Thanks for having me, Courtney, and hello to everyone watching. My name is Matt Diaz. I'm the Advanced Planning Manager with the City of Stockton. I have been a planner my entire career. That is something I went to school for. I've got 2 degrees in planning. I've been doing it since 2004, 2005. So I've been mostly a private side consultant for about 12 years of my background. That's actually how I got involved with the City of Stockton back in 2017 when I was working for a company that subbed work out. I was helping with a variety of different items like the CarMax project off of Hammer and some other items. I left to go work for the City of Elk Grove for a couple years as their senior planner who dealt with entitlements, capital improvement projects, policy documents. And then about 2019 is when I was officially hired as the Advanced Planning Manager for the City of Stockton, and I've been serving that role since. My primary responsibilities are helping to manage and create long-range policy documents, accompanying standards to those policy documents. I also work on special projects, larger scale, more complex entitlements. I also coordinate with other departments for internal requests. I do work with current planning, and then just any other item that somebody may need some assistance in figuring out how it fits with our standards. But I think that's Matt Diaz in a nutshell, I guess, so to speak.
Thank you. Okay, so you've been doing planning for a long time. In your role, you oversee a lot of the policy creation, among other projects. And just in case anyone hasn't watched our past videos with your counterparts, who are also with advanced planning at the City of Stockton, can you kind of remind us what is the overarching goal or focus of the advanced planning department? Like, what are you guys there to do?
Our primary goal is the creation and management of those long-range documents and the standards for that. We do a variety of different things, though. We have a small department, both current planning and long-range planning with advanced planning, which is what I do. So we all wear a lot of hats. So you might see us on project reviews. Cynthia worked on an O'Reilly's annexation project. Tristian's been working on tentative subdivision maps. These are not things that are typically their responsibility, but they assist when they can. For the most part, their time is consumed by what we call Shape Stockton, which is a variety of different activities, like the development code overhaul, design standards, housing element update, housing action plan, neighborhood action plan, and just a variety of small things in there. So that's generally what we spend our time doing, in addition to answering small questions from the public here and there. But yeah, our primary focus, again, is more long-range policy documents. So that's why you'll see our names on those versus use permits to the Planning Commission.
Perfect. So you're oriented towards the future, primarily, in a lot of the planning that you guys are doing. Awesome.
Sounds cool. Yeah, it is, but yeah.
You get to plan. You get to decide what's happening the next 5 years. It is exciting. So can you kind of share, you mentioned people ask questions. What is the most common question that you get asked in your role, and how would you answer it?
Common question. I think the common question is, can I put this business here or can I build this at that location? I think there's a common misconception a lot of times when people call planning staff, whether it's advanced planning or current planning. And that's why I think our roles have kind of evolved to serve more purposes. So it's not our primary responsibility, but we do field a lot of calls and questions about, a typical front counter stuff. Can I put this business here? Can I build that there? Can I cut down this tree? These are things we help facilitate. So I'd say that's probably a big question that we get, even though it's not technically something involved with our primary responsibility. I'd say another question is the generic what's happening in Stockton, which is sometimes hard to ask because my team is focused on policy documents, but there are a lot of different things going on right now in the city with new development, continuum of care with homelessness, county op work, the work you're doing with economic development in the downtown area. So it's a little hard sometimes when we get those kind of questions to say, well, what do you mean specifically about what's happening in Stockton? Because it's a big city and there's a lot going on. And even though we're supposed to know as much as we can, we don't always know everything. And then I'd say the last one probably we get the most is why is whatever we're doing needed? Why is a housing element update needed? Why is a development code overhaul needed? These are just typical questions we get because people get notices and they come out and they're interested and they may not know maybe what they attended in the past. So the question is, well, why am I getting noticed now? So those are typical questions that we get on a daily basis.
Okay. So since you shared a couple of different things, can I ask you a couple of further questions, if that's all right? So the first one, where someone's coming to you and asking if they can build something in a particular location, if they do come to you with that, where would you refer them to? Just in case anyone's listening to this or watching this thinking the same thing, and maybe they were going to go to planning. Where should they go? Where would you direct them?
So you can still reach out to us. I've got a lot of individuals who work with us on the Shape Stockton items. They come to us and then we can loop in who's needed for that. The permit center, which consists of fire department, community development, I think the business license and finance, has a variety of different departments here. So it's almost like a one-stop shop. If someone wants to come to the permit center to ask a general question like that, you're going to get an answer from somebody, and probably sometimes it's going to be more detailed and probably a better answer than I can give. But I'd say don't tell anybody they have to reach this person or that. I mean, you can send it to me and I can reach the group in, but typically current planning or our front counter staff are probably best suited to answer those questions because they deal with that section of the code and process a lot more than I do on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that, just in case anyone needed that information. And something interesting that you said was that people are asking you, why do we need updates to these various things, the housing element update, the development code, etc., which we're definitely going to talk about today. So before we dive into that and how you might answer that, first, I'd like to know, how does your work coincide with the work of Tristian Osborn, who I had as a past guest, as well as Cynthia Marsh, who I had as a past guest? You guys are all in the same department. How does your work coincide with their work?
Certainly. So typically, as the advanced planning manager, I oversee any of the policy document creation, any of the report creation by my team of Cynthia, or Cindy, we call her, and Tristian. So that's my primary role, is to see what they're doing, give direction when needed, bring in other departments when I feel it's necessary, and then review any of the product they put together. So what we do is we typically, they are the leads for each project. So as you said, Tristan's with the neighborhood action plan, Cindy's with the housing efforts. I'm primarily the lead for the development code and the design standards, but my job as the manager is to make sure all of them kind of move forward step. And then one thing that we have to be cognizant of is internal consistency between all those documents, because you normally don't have this much work being processed at the same time. So my job is to make sure that they're all moving forward and that a change made to the housing document isn't inconsistent or runs afoul with something in the development code. So my job working with them is to help each individual effort as it moves along, but also keep an eye on how that effort will impact other efforts. Let's say Cindy's effort impacts Tristan's effort, or Tristan impacts my effort. So that's my primary responsibility with the Shape Stockton. I do that for other projects and entitlements too, that are processed through them, but um, that's my role.
Perfect. So I think that's important. You don't want conflicting policies, conflicting programs, because that will only frustrate the public when they're trying to get a project done.
Absolutely, and in some cases it is required by state law. So I have to make sure that anything we do is legally sound in addition to making sense.
Excellent. Very important. Okay, so in my conversations with Tristian, he dove deeply into the zoning update that your department is working on. He also talked about the neighborhood action plan. Cynthia talked about the housing element update and the housing action plan. And I know you're working on the development code and the objective design standards update. So all of these updates are going on at the same time, which is why it's been so interesting talking to each of you. Can you please explain why are they all happening simultaneously, and is that unusual to have this much change going on?
Certainly. So I would say, let's take a step back and look at it from the context. So the state basically had a proclamation that said, we are in a housing crisis and we need to significantly increase housing production to accommodate that crisis. So what the state's been doing for the last few years is awarding grant money to cities to change their policy documents to do things that would encourage housing production. It could be retooling the zoning code, changing up your internal process, anything basically they're throwing at the wall to make sure that we can build homes better and faster. As a result of that, Stockton has received about $2 million in grant money. And we have a deadline to do work and reimburse that money by winter of next year, specifically December of 2023. So we have to complete work, and then reimburse the work by December of next year for us to seek reimbursement for that money. And it's not work staff has to do, it's more like consultant work, which is why we have a consultant team working with us. So I can't necessarily reimburse the city for my time. So that's kind of the impetus for the deadline. And as to your point, it is a tad unusual to have all of these going at the same time. But, the city doesn't want to miss out on $2 million. And I don't blame the city if we can get these efforts, which are needed, paid for by the state. It just kind of puts more of the weight on our shoulders to make sure, we put a good high quality product in, we address everybody's needs, do a thorough public engagement process within the next year or so that we can present something that is sound, reasonable, and at the cost of at the expense of the state. I have heard rumors that deadline may be extended a bit, which may cause us to pause and then kind of figure out the sequencing of how we get some of these efforts adopted, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I think the only document we know for sure that needs to be completed by the end of next year is the housing element update, because that's required by state law. So that's the one document I know will not change if we're given more time to complete these efforts.
Got it. So can you explain how do all these updates work together and why are they important? To touch on the common question that you're asked, like, why do we need updates? You just explained that it's a state requirement for the housing component, but for each of the other ones, like the development code, the design standards, yes, why is it important that you update them and why now? Let's say if you didn't have funding, would it be something that's done on a different sort of timeline?
Yes. Short answer. The city's been interested in doing a development code since since before I was hired in 2019. And the city's been at the same time interested in doing what we called back then a affordable strategic housing plan. which is kind of morphed into this housing action plan. So we were always interested in doing those two items. The housing element was always something that was required, that was on the horizon. Fortunately, the horizon is here, and we have to finish it and work on it. But there's also nothing really in state law requiring us to overhaul our development code or our design standards. Those are two documents where over time, they were both adopted in 2004, but over time, let's say for instance, the development code has kind of been pieced together, band-aids here, band-aids there. It's just kind of outdated. It doesn't really make sense. So, excuse me, fighting that cold. So it doesn't really make sense. So we are overhauling that, and then the design standards are the document formerly known as the design guidelines. Those are important because it gives us a tool to encourage high quality design through architecture, on-site amenities, trash enclosures. When you look at a nice building and go, wow, I really like the windows they put there, I like the facade, I like the color scheme, materials. A lot of that is a result of our use of the design guidelines, which will become standards. Excuse me.
Sorry.
No, it's like reacting to the question, I guess. And then housing strategic plan became the housing action plan. That is really a document we were interested in as a city. That document is two parts. It is one part how-to manual, so that anyone, staff, residents, developers can look at our standards for housing and go, that makes sense. I can put these types of housing there. I can contact these resources for this type. So it's kind of a user manual for everybody on how to do any type of housing in the city of Stockton. And then the second part of that document is more strategic in that we're going to be looking at sites as possible catalytic sites that we could consolidate resources to. We're going to make a series of recommendations in the report to the residents and the elected officials about, well, here are the problems we found. Here are some of the solutions. We recommend the council do this. We recommend residents and business owners consider to do that. So that's that part of that document. And we wanted to go a step further with that housing action plan by investigating 3 specific neighborhoods to see if we can do anything neighborhood specific within those areas. So that's kind of how the neighborhood action plans are going to actually be a component of the housing action plan. We're just kind of separating them out because the neighborhood action plans will be more universal. Like, what do you want to see in the South Stockton area? Or airport area? What do you want to see in Gleason Park, Manila? The housing action plan is going to be more citywide based. They're going to go, okay, well, here's everything we want to do. Here's the entire city action, what we want to take to increase production. But again, the only thing really required by state law is the housing element update, which is an important document too, but that's more of what our housing policies are, what our current demographics are, and then which is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA for short. That is basically our agreement with the state to indicate how much housing capacity we will maintain within the next 8 years. I'm sure the folks out there have heard about RHNA this and RHNA that. It's essentially the state saying, we anticipate Stockton to grow by this much. And for that much to occur, Stockton needs to have at least enough land on hand to accommodate, and I think our recent number is 12,000 units. So what we have to do for the housing element is to ensure that we can keep enough available land to accommodate the construction of 12,000 units within the next 8 years, which we're confident we can do. It's just another step we have to take.
Wow, and needed. We always need more housing. So thank you for explaining a little more about how the neighborhood action plan, the housing action plan, and the housing element update work together. You also kind of dove into the design standards a little bit. That's kind of seems to be the way that buildings look, where things are placed. Can you tell us now about the development code? What is that, and why is that important?
It is a very big and long document. The development code is one section of what's called the municipal code. And the municipal code is a citywide document that contains multiple chapters, multiple sections, and that are the standards by which we as a city operate. So you've got the general plan, which is the visioning document that says the city wants to seek to do this and that. And the municipal code is the actual almost like how to at the regulatory standards for all of that to occur. And it not just affects us, it's like police, finance, everything's in there. It's just that the development code is one section that we, community development, use the most. The development code was adopted in 2004, and it actually consolidated zoning, subdivision, and public improvement sections of our code, municipal code, into one, so that you could go to that one document and see everything pertaining to development. There's been a few larger efforts or amendments since the 2004 adoption, but it's relatively remained the same since 2004. As part of a variety of code and map amendments, the city made 3 series of changes to it in the last few years, which we realized we needed to overhaul the development code, which caused us to put this to the front and center. But the development code is important because it is the tool that probably most residents, business owners, planners, developers will use to determine what business can go where, what can I do with my house, what building can I build there, can I build apartments over in this location, can I subdivide this property into whatever. The development code includes all of those standards, which is why it's very important, uh, not only for the city but for residents and developers, because 2004 is a long time, and we've noticed a lot of issues that have kind of accumulated in it, and we're trying to fix those and modernize that document.
Wow. Okay, thank you. It does sound very important, and also like there are a lot of components working together to create the development code. So I'm sure it's very complex as well. All right. As far as the objective design standards, you did kind of explain what they are, but in your opinion, why are they also important and need an update?
Sure. So the zoning code does a lot. The development code does a lot. Usually regulates the use, where I can put a business. I want to open a coffee shop. Where can I do it? It regulates the design, the general components of a design, like what's the density, what's the setbacks, how high can I build, basic components of how much landscaping I have to put somewhere. The design guidelines, which are morphing into design standards, they go a step further and basically says, okay, well, here are different architectural types. Here's Spanish, here's French colonial, here's modern. Here are the elements we want to see if you propose that design. Here are subdivision layout examples of what a good design looks like. Here's what a trash enclosure should look like. These are the nitty-gritty fine points that actually go into us designing or helping to regulate the design of a building. So if you see a new building put up, let's say Grandview, I think in downtown, that went through a process where we looked at it and went, okay, well, it needs to have a defined edge line. It needs to have a variant base. It needs to have windows here and there to kind of create more human scale, pedestrian friendly frontage. So that's why it's important that we use those 2 documents in conjunction. The design guidelines are pretty flexible right now. And again, since it was adopted in 2004, the climate has changed in that what used to be, we would just do discretionary review for design. So what I mean by discretionary review is we take it and discuss it and have a bunch of conditions, and people decide what looks nice and what doesn't look nice. The climate in that has shifted to a more, the state wants us to approve things faster and wants to approve it higher quality. You might hear streamlining development. You might hear ministerial approvals. Yeah. So that's the whole push right now. And that's hard to do if your design standards aren't clear. So that's why we're shifting them from guidelines, which could be, would you please encourage, would you do this, could you consider doing that, to more, you have to do this, you have to do that. Here are some flexible options for you on these items there. So we're shifting to that approach to kind of help not only developers but staff, because if you think about the built environment around you, most buildings have a average lifespan of what, 30 to 50 years, they say. Most infrastructure maybe 70 to 100. And if we are condensing our review of new construction down from what used to be 3-6 months down to 3 weeks, 2 weeks.
Wow.
It's important for us to get it right up front,
Yes.
Which is why we need more clarity in our standards. We need more enforceability in our standards, and that's why that document is important, because in some cases it's the more noticeable component of zoning. No one really notices the setbacks. Nobody really notices, how many long-term versus short-term bike parking spaces there are on a site. They notice the material that was used at the entrance, or that the entrance popped a little bit more at the corner. These are the things the design standards will help us regulate.
Yeah, it's very important, and I can see why changing it to standards versus guidelines is actually going to be helpful for developers and anyone who's taking on a new project. Just from stories that I've heard about people who, they bring in something, they say they want to do a project of this type, and maybe it's the staff that they went to kind of just said, oh well, we can't allow that, but they didn't have something to show them that said, but we will allow this, like just build it this way. So it kind of makes a little bit of a back and forth headache for certain projects. So this actually is great news. I'm very excited to hear about it. Can you tell us about any specific changes that you can think of that you've been working on to the design standards or to the development code that you'd like to share? There's probably thousands.
Well, yeah, no. I think combined, the documents are around 1,500 pages. So it's hard to say where do I start on that one. I can do a quick plug. We are
Maybe your
discussing.
favorites.
Well, quick plug. We are discussing some of the results of a workshop we did on the design standards at tomorrow's Planning Commission meeting. So I encourage anybody who can attend. It'll basically be a report to the Planning Commission that on September 24th, we did a visual preference survey, if you will, with some of the folks that showed up for a workshop. And here's the results. And then this is what we want to do. And what we did at that meeting was basically say is, here are different designs. What type of design do you like? Where do you want to see it? What other examples from other cities do you like? And where would you like to see that in Stockton? So if you have time, I encourage anybody to at least take a look at the materials or show up and voice your opinion. And that's tomorrow at 5:30 in the council chambers. Going back to what's changing, I know we want to keep as much as the work that's still applicable that we can. So there's a lot of good stuff. If you go into the 2004 design guidelines that, talked about certain focused areas like, Gleason Park, Magnolia, Miracle Mile, a lot of good stuff in there that we want to keep. And in some cases, we'll just convert it from a guideline to a standard. So we will modernize it. I think there's a lot of different architectural themes out there that were not as prevalent in 2004. There's a big push nowadays for more modern, clean. So I think you'll see more modern architectural standards, more enforcement of on-site requirements. We're still investigating this and trying to get a sense from folks, but you'll see more updated, more examples, more graphics. I know off the bat, because pictures do tell a lot more than a sentence or two about whatever. From the zoning or development code overhaul, we had a study session on July 28th, which summarizes some of the main changes for folks that are interested. I can send links and then you can post them after this chat. But
Yes.
long story short, we are consolidating the number of divisions in the code. We know that up front. There's a lot of redundancy with our development code that we want to get rid of for clarity purposes, not only from staff, but residents. And to put that into context, one of the objectives of the 2004 development code overhaul was that the old code the city used was complex, confusing all across the board. So they wanted to bring clarity in 2004, but unfortunately they siloed the document a bit. And so how we all these sections everywhere, and in time, people just kept adding silos and not. So now we're kind of consolidating back and just saying, okay, well, let's make a one-stop shop for some of these items, because people shouldn't have to look at how to remove a tree limb in my front yard and have to go to 8 different sections of the code to find it.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Consolidation is a big one. I think what we want to do with the development code, we want to make more uses by right, meaning that if you're a business owner, you want to come in, you don't have to go to the planning commission or get a staff review before you open your business. For that, we'll probably add more performance measures, standards for certain businesses that they can go in. Um, that's a big one right now. It's just whittling it down to what we want to keep and what we don't want to keep. We also want to tailor the document in a way that makes it easier to evolve in the future, because the development code is really a reflection of the city's current stance on a topic, or let's say best practices at the time, even state laws, and that's always changing. So I think one of the things we want to be cognizant of with the development code overhaul is we want a document that can evolve in time and make it easier for staff to change. Because I mean, even last year we had like 20 to 30 state bills change, or state bills that were proposed or adopted that changed components of our code, in some cases large scale. So we want
Oh,
to make
wow.
a document that can accommodate changes easier than what our current document does now.
Wow. Thank you for sharing opportunities for the public to kind of get involved, to learn about what you're doing. And it sounds like you even provide feedback. So excellent. Yes. And we would love to, put that out on social media as a post. So please send that over to us. Would love to get people to come and join. Okay. So, and kind of touching on what you mentioned a couple of things that are changing. So it looks like we can expect maybe more modern styles when it comes to the design standards. Are there any outdated or historical codes or design standards that you like really stick out to you? Maybe they're funny or they're just so outdated that you can't wait to change them. Can you share any of those for us?
I wouldn't point to anything specific, because one thing we found is I might personally and go like, that's terrible, who would ever write that? And somebody else looks at it and goes, wow, that makes sense, I really want to keep that. Like, what? No, I just think you find things in the code where I think somebody really put attention to something, and you're like, wow, I get that. And in other areas of the code, you find that, why was it written this way? And you find it was a carryover from the previous code before 2004, and it hasn't really been looked at in forever, and everybody just assumed there was a purpose for it being there, and you're like, what? It's mentioning, you know, public telephone, payphones, and all this other stuff. I'm like, we haven't had those in, like, why would we, like, we regulate businesses on how many payphones are going to have at the front? Like, what? So you see stuff like that, and it's just, and I think one of the things I think most that you're going to see, and I'm not pointing to a specific section, but how people view the section. I mean, Courtney, you're going to look at that document different than I'd look at that document, and it's just trying to get everybody on the same page to say, is okay, well, does this make sense to somebody who's not us? Is there a compromise we can make where, let's say you, a business owner in the downtown, want to put up a business and install a, projecting sign that does this and that. Does the code make sense to you? And do we have enough tools to enforce a quality design while at the same time getting you in and out of the permit center so that you can begin doing what you want to do? And I think that, to me, is more of the interesting component versus what section we want to change. Or what, as I mentioned to you, like, we can propose changes to anything and state law will change it the next week and it's already outdated. We did that for the density code, density bonus section of the code, I think earlier this year or last year, where we allowed a density bonus up to 100%, which is
Right.
pretty big. So we did a bunch of different things, and we thought we were really cool for doing it. And then, sure enough, state law changed something, I think 2 months after we adopted the ordinance, and we had to go back and redo it all again and change different. So it stuff like that. I don't hang my hat on a specific, section that says it's going to look like that, but my overall goal is that it makes sense to someone like me who's been doing planning for a while, and someone off the street who may not know planning and is looking to get some kind of permit. So I think, to me, that's the interesting discussion with all of this. How do we take something that is very large and complex and make it more user friendly, while at the same time not running afoul with the state law or any of our other documents out there? So that to me is a more interesting puzzle.
I think that's exciting from a development standpoint. Really seeing how are you communicating to the public what they need to do, what's allowed, what's okay, and seeing if it translates and makes it easier for them to begin projects. I love that. Okay.
Yeah, and it's been an interesting journey. I don't want to bore people with how the specifics of the detail, which is why we usually tell people what looks pretty to you, what architectural types or business types do you like, and then it's my job to translate into why you like that. Maybe it's pedestrian friendly. Maybe there's multimodal options. Maybe it's because the use of colors. Maybe it's because it stands out more, it's a little more unique. These are the jobs we have to do and disseminate that information when we see comment. And that, to me, that's part of the fun part. It's almost like coding a website. What websites do you like? And my job is to go in there and write all the code to make it work. It's just, I don't want people to get caught up in the technical part of the code. I just want people to look, does this make sense? Does that look good? Tell me where you want these things, and then we'll come back as part of this and present something where hopefully it runs in line with what they're looking for.
Very interesting. To that point, how much of the development code and the design standards are informed by state law versus just local government preference versus public opinion? Is it kind of a combination of those and other factors that go into deciding what our development code looks like and what our design standards look like?
Certainly. So put that question into context. The states are granted certain powers by the federal government. Federalism, I'm sure everybody's heard of these overarching topics before. Some states regulate development more, other states kind of divvy that to the local jurisdictions. In California, the state gives us a variety of things that we have to do and have to include. And then we, as a local government, can basically do everything in between there, or we can go beyond them in some cases. So there's a lot in the development code that's actually grounded or rooted in state law. So I mentioned like the density bonus. This current density bonus, I believe, is 50% allowed by the state. So I can't do anything about that. But what I can do is I can allow density bonuses greater than 50% up to 100 through whatever process I deem fit as a city to encourage that. So that's kind of how state law and local codes work hand in hand. Local codes are not going to regulate things like design, so they're not going to get in there and say your state required setbacks have to be this. That's more of a design issue. Or you have to have 30% boutiques and 20% coffee shops in your downtown. Like they're not going to come in and say that. They may regulate things like our annexation process, how we deal with the local agency for information commission. The subdivision standards are rooted in what's called the Subdivision Map Act. So we have a basis of what we have to adhere to as part of the Map Act, and then we can encourage additional requirements and standards beyond that. Some of the specific uses, let's say like care facilities, child or adult, substance abuse, those are all kind of protected uses by the state through the American Disabilities Act. So we can't really do much to them aside from saying, here's the process as required by the state, and here's where you can do certain things. And so there's not like one section. You mostly see certain uses and then certain processes. But when you get to those situations, it's just let's just refer to the code and what can we do beyond it. So
Okay, so you guys have leeway to work with, and then but you are looking for public opinion. So how much does that sway kind of what you decide to do?
I feel my role as a public planner is a facilitator. And a facilitator, what we do is we take feedback from multiple groups. So you've got developers here, residents there, experts on experts is a term I've heard planners being called before in the past. Jack of all trades. I'm not saying this needs to be the case or that needs to be the case. So we take in all forms of feedback on something. And we look at residents as experts in the area, more so than myself because I haven't lived in Stockton and I don't currently live in Stockton, but I do really care about what the residents of Stockton say, what's needed in their area. the thing we have to weigh is that recommendation or advice the best possible recommendation we can make when talking to other experts in the field. And so that's why I said is we do consider it and we do put a lot of weight on the feedback we receive for these areas. It's just that we also weigh it against the feedback from others, because in some cases you may get conflicting points where we have received from business owners, I want to do let's say single family detached housing in the downtown area. Now
Mhm.
you as the Downtown Alliance may not like that because you want higher densities, you want more intensities. So I have to weigh the feedback I receive from one group versus the other and make a recommendation on what we feel the consensus may be or what the pros and cons of that decision might be. So it gets factored in there. And in some cases, the residents have very good points that we have to, especially on design, because I can't tell people what looks nice or what doesn't look nice. But we have to weigh that when we make a recommendation. And in some cases, we acknowledge the fact that they may want something or recommend something, but that they may run afoul with, either state law or the advice given to us by the development community or professionals in the industry. So it's a complex balance.
Interesting. Would you say then it's more on a project by project basis that you're looking for public input?
Well, we're looking for public input on everything. I don't think there's one thing the city is saying, no, I'm not, I'm done. We're done. We don't want to take any comments on. I think everything's fair game. There's just certain processes where they've been vetted a bunch. Let's say like you as a property owner want to do a addition in your back, residential, a new room in your house. I don't have to put that up for public comment. People can comment on it, but we've crafted the standards in a way that you as a property owner, if you comply with the standards and you're not creating an impact to anybody, that
Mhm.
I can seek feedback from people, but we've pretty much allowed you as a property owner to do that because that's your right. In other cases where, let's say it's a large project that involves multiple components, then yes, I mean, we'll go out and seek feedback because we want to make sure we get it right if it's a complex situation. Now, most cases, what we're doing with the Shape Stockton is we're doing a first round of public outreach, which we're doing now till probably early next year, create a bunch of draft standards, and then come back to the groups and say, hey, everybody, this is what we heard, this is what we did, excuse me, and do you agree with this for us to complete the draft and move forward? So yes to everything, but in some cases it's more of a I hear you what you're saying, and maybe we can look at that at the next round, but I cannot, let's say, taking feedback from your property owner or from your neighbor, going back to my business or building analogy, and stop your permit because of it. That's, I can listen, but on situations like that, I will not get involved. Um, but for the larger things, yes, absolutely, feedback is vital and needed at any point, whether it's today or in the next year.
Excellent. Okay, so when it comes to giving that feedback, can you tell us all the methods that someone might be able to use if they do want to be included?
Certainly. Um, you can send emails. Emails work really well. You can write letters. We can meet face to face. Um, it just anything is open right now, and it's easier for us now than let's say doing outreach during the pandemic because we were kind of limited to drop offs and only Teams meetings. So right now, what you're seeing is us going out into the public and meeting face to face. We have a face to face meeting, I think, in off the Miracle Mile tonight. Again, we have the Planning Commission meeting tomorrow. So if anybody has something, I'm not restricting them to one method or one way of reaching me. You can call, you can email, I'd say text, but I don't give up my personal cell phone. But we're here and our door is always open for anybody seeking any feedback. And what we did with Shape Stockton is when we first started, it wasn't under the umbrella of Shape Stockton. It was just kind of here's the development code, here's the housing element. And we felt that that was restricting a person's ability to comment on other things. So if you only got an email for housing element update. You may not know about the other efforts going on. So what we did was with Shape Stockton, we kind of created a focal point, if you will, for individuals to go straight to the website. And if you're interested in housing, great, go to housing. There's a whole bunch of comments, questions, materials on housing. If you're interested in the other stuff, by all means, show up, comment. I've had folks show up to the design standard workshop and go, I'm really interested in housing, and then inform them with the website, we have a housing meeting on October 19th. And they showed up on the 19th meeting, and that's exactly the conversation they wanted to have, more so than the design standard. So for anybody involved, I'd say start with Shape Stockton and then get a hold of anybody you can, Tristian, Cindy, myself, and we'll do our best to answer your question.
Thank you. Yes, we'll include the link to that, I think, as a comment to this video, just so that people know where they can learn about Shape Stockton, how they can get their feedback heard, and get involved in these changes that you guys are working on. Okay, so I just have a couple of more questions. The development code and the design standards update that you're working on, can you tell us how will this affect any projects that are already underway or in the middle of construction? And when can we expect for these changes to be complete?
Long story short, they won't affect anything in process right now. Okay. Those projects were approved under a current set of standards. It's almost like when you're approved, it's almost like an agreement that you to move forward based on that.
Great.
So it won't affect anything moving forward right now. Since these documents will probably not be adopted till winter of next year, I don't think it'll impact any new development until 2024. Obviously, as I said, with the house scenario, I can't regulate something on a standard that doesn't exist. So it's not like I can look at a building and say like, well, you should really do this. This is what we're proposing in the design standard, because the design standards are adopted. So it's a lot of good feedback right now, but for the most part, I don't anticipate our staff to start using these documents until after their adoption. And again, that's probably the first quarter of 2024, where you'll start to see this posted online. You'll see handouts associated with it, probably training for staff on how to use this, how to use that. But right now we're just focused on research and then feedback.
Okay. And downtown, as you know, has lots of historic buildings. Will there be any specific changes to the code or the design standards that will particularly impact downtown?
Yeah, probably a good amount. We want to keep downtown flexible. We want to keep the downtown standards intense. What you're seeing in downtown is a bit of a challenge in that you've got small scale projects that want to come in, maybe an infill fourplex on a lot that's 5,000 square feet. But how do you weigh that against a downtown that really was envisioned to have, let's say, density like 108 units gross? Like on one end, we want a big thriving downtown. On the other end, that's not really reflective of the market right now in Stockton. So we are trying to strike this balance between reaffirming the downtown vision of what we want, the intensities, the uses, how it functions, while at the same time addressing more short-term existing market concerns about, well, we've got somebody who wants to do a fourplex, somebody who wants to do a duplex on a very small lot, or wants to build ADUs in the back of the property, or they want to put this business in on that place. So development codes addressing questions like that. From a design standpoint, I think we've got really good staff here. We've got design guidelines. You will see some refinement of the different architectural types we can put downtown. We have a downtown section and set of downtown standards within our design guidelines. So anyone can go take a look and see, what would be required. But I think what you'll see is a refinement of that to more modern design practices. What kind of building types are out there. Back in the day, 2004, the 4/1, 5/1 construction wasn't as prevalent. So now you might see standards that reflect those types of current design practices in the downtown area. But if there's stuff out there, I tell people, if you see stuff that you like in other downtowns, make a recommendation. We'll explore it. Again, I'm from Sacramento, so I take a look at what they did on theirs and say stuff I like and stuff I don't like, and I try to translate as much as I can into the document.
Interesting. Interesting to see, what these new design standards will look like, how they will impact development in downtown. Very, very interesting. I'd like to know, as like kind of an overview of all of the work that you are doing on the housing element, the zoning, development code, design standards, all of it together. With all of these changes, what do you specifically hope to see downtown look like in the next 5 years as a result of some of these changes that you've been working on?
Certainly. I think for this question personally, not as advanced planning manager, I I personally don't think that's a question for me to answer. I think that's what you're going to see in downtown is more of a reflection of what the residents, the business owners, and the elected officials would like to see downtown. So, and I'm not too concerned with that because I feel people generally want the same type of vision in downtown. So it's not like someone's going to propose something vastly different than what other downtowns are like. I think the thing I would like to see most is that I think with Stockton, with the downtown specifically, the whole conversation is more of a, personally, a supply and demand issue in that you're going to reach a tipping point where market pressures are going to pop and you're going to see a lot of work downtown. Hopefully, at the time, our standards are in place. The vision's all reaffirmed for downtown, so we know exactly what we want to do. But I think at some point, the market pressures are going to force the downtown to go through this transition. I use Sacramento as a good example because I've lived there around the area for the last 20 something years. Um, it's very similar to me as Stockton in that for years and years and years, it sat there dormant. You had daytime activity, you had a lot of vacancies, you had a city that did not have a focused vision on something. Um, and then the last 5 to 10 years, you've started to see things change. You've got the DOCO, you've got some other others. You start to see this transition, and currently the city's going through a bit of a renaissance. Now, Sacramento is a different environment than Stockton, but I think you're going to see that transition at some point when the market hits. And for me personally, instead of saying I want downtown to be like this or like that, I just want to be part of that situation when it happens because I think that's going to be a very cool thing to occur, not only for Stockton in general, but just to see from a planning standpoint when an area starts to go through this metamorphosis into something like that. So that's, to me, what I'm excited about in the downtown. And I'd like to say at some point, one of these things that we've done was a factor in that change because I can't tell you development code, design standards, whatever, what the development community or the community in general are really going to latch onto and what's going to change something. We're kind of throwing a bunch of tools out there to see what they'll use. So it'd be interesting to see what tool someone might use as part of that change in the downtown and to say, hey, yeah, we did that for a specific reason. Awesome. That's, to me, is what gets me more excited.
Okay, thank you. And I think the last question I'll ask before we take maybe one or two of your questions, because I know you need to leave soon, is going to be, so the work that you guys have done, would you say that each of these changes is really going to make it easier for development to happen in Stockton overall? Or what would be your opinion on what the impact is going to be on attracting development here and getting that change to happen?
As I said, I think it's a matter of time before we start to see certain things happen, just because market demands and pressures will eventually build. In 2000, we had a population of 240,000. We're at now, 316,000. At some point, that's going to put pressure on the downtown to build more to accommodate the increased growth. So I think pressures are just encourage that to happen. What we'd like to do with the city, though, is to set the table, so to speak, for that to happen. And while I think a tipping point is coming for that in Stockton, we don't know when that tipping point is. And so I think from a city standpoint, our job is to shorten that time for that tipping point so that instead of, say, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 3 years from now, we hit that. But I think on that end, as a city, we need to set the table to get the vision right, to reaffirm the vision for downtown, to get the standards
Mhm.
right for downtown. And then I think personally we need to be more proactive, which we're trying to do. I think a lot of other departments are trying to do, to encourage the development in these areas. They make it easier for development, but not just any development, the right development, because
Mhm.
you could have all types of bad businesses go in downtown that are not consistent with the vision. The idea is to make what you want, the right type of development, easy, super easy to do, and then regulate everything else. So that's what we're really trying to do with all of this. And I think, being more proactive as opposed to reactive is our way of shortening that tipping point window, in my opinion.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for your input and for answering that question. Okay, so let's real quick, let me look at if there's maybe one or two audience questions that we can show you. 1 second. Okay, so we've got one question here from Michael Huber. He's asking, he says, hi, Matt. I know homeless housing and shelters seem to be the most talked about, but there seems to be a housing crisis for low-income individuals that are working who don't qualify for housing assistance and can't afford market rate units. Is there a plan for this sector of the population? Is that anything that you could speak to about options for people who are working but maybe can't afford market rate housing? Will any of the work that you do help those kinds of individuals?
I'd say certainly depend on how direct or indirect our assistance will be is really up to where the documents go. And I think a good point is, so we've got the housing element, which is policy driven. And if we explore and receive more comments like this, we can make recommendations on policies that would give us the tools to seek more funding or assistance or change something to, say, create a partnership with another group. I think to, excuse me, Michael's point specifically, what you might see in the housing action plan is it goes beyond just the policies that encourage this and that. It might actually tell you, okay, well, here's, and I think right now we're looking at three categories of housing type. You've had emergency housing for homeless individuals, you've got supportive and transitional housing, which is its own function, and then you've got permanent housing. And in each one of those sections, we're going to dive into, well, where can you do this in this? Where can you do this in this city? What do we mean when we say this? What other resources and partnerships are out there? So specifically for this question, there may be more financial assistance out there that I'm aware of because I don't necessarily deal with this question. We have a housing division that's a component of our economic development team. I deal with
Mhm.
more of the policy base, but as part of the HAP process to kind of create this how-to manual, we may find a series of partnerships that already exist or a series of funds that may already exist. And to your point, in terms of if we go in the permanent housing section of the HAP or Housing Action Plan, and we list that if you're seeking this, go to this group here, go to that person here. Here are the resources for those areas. That might be something our document can achieve. And then if we want to make recommendations, let's say if we don't have those resources, then the housing action plan will say, hey, we're missing something vital here. We need to have a point person for this. We need to seek out these types of funding sources for that. This is what the documents, the research told us is that we're missing. So yes, at some degree, these documents will help this conversation. It really depends on where the severity of the problem and the research that we have. And right now, we're trying to compile those because there's a lot of different housing resources in the city of Stockton um, that I don't deal with on a day-to-day basis. Even the continuum of care for homelessness, I've had conversations with them, but I really don't know the type of resources they have and how they fit into what we define as emergency shelters.
Okay, thank you so much for your question, Michael, and thank you, Matt, for answering it. So we're here at 11 o'clock. Do you need to jump out, or do
I've got some time.
you have time for maybe one more question? Okay,
Sure.
excellent. So here's from Abel the God from Instagram. This person is asking, is there any plan that you're working on that you're excited about? Maybe there's one piece of all this huge work that you're doing that you're the most excited about?
Well, number one, it's coffee in the morning because there's a lot of reading and writing with these ones. I'm excited about, I mean, to be honest, I'm excited about all of them. There's not, it's almost like my kids. Like, I can't tell you which one I like the best because they're all important and they all do different functions. One of the things I can tell you that when we started creating, I not say I myself, but the group started actually investigating was the housing action plan.
Mhm.
So we used to have a affordable strategic plan, which basically would focus only on affordable housing for the city of Stockton. And we were going to go that route a couple of years ago until we started getting more general questions about, well, what about emergency housing, homelessness? What about transitional housing? What about permanent housing, missing middle? These are topics you wouldn't include in an affordable housing plan. These are topics that are just housing in general. And so we started creating the idea of what if we created this kind of how-to document that showed people, all people, city staff, developers, whatever, what do we mean when we say this? What do we mean when we say that? More of a linear process for the questions that we were getting on a daily basis. Kind of a proactive, I have the answers to the questions before we even ask the question kind of document. And then second part is, where do we want to build these and what recommendations we want to make? So I'm excited about that document just because I don't think I've seen one like that around. Other documents, strategic plans out there do a lot of different components, but they're more geared to one specific purpose. The housing action plan right now is more of a utility document that you can hopefully use and keep around and point to something and go, oh, look at that. That's really cool. I didn't know I could do this. I used an example at our last housing meeting about tiny homes. People say tiny homes a lot, but people want to use tiny homes for a variety of different ways. People want to use tiny homes for permanent affordable housing. People want to use tiny homes for market rate housing. People want to use tiny homes for emergency shelters. So I think us creating a document that says, okay, here are the definitions for these different types of housing. Here's where the zones in the city allow them. Here's the process. And then here are some resources and funding types that you can apply to, not maybe through the city, but to the county
Mhm.
for those types. I think that to me is more exciting because it puts us all on the same playing field. And we're using that document actually to improve our other documents because if we map these out in a linear progression, like I said with tiny homes, you kind of see the gaps in your standards. You start to see the gaps in your policy, or that, as Michael mentioned with funding, maybe we don't have a funding source for that. Then we can kind of fill in the gaps. Unfortunately, right now, not going on, we can make corrections to our development code. We can make corrections to our house element. So to a certain extent, I use the metaphor of we're building the home and designing the interior at the same time. We have that flexibility in some cases, and I think the HAP at the end of the day is a document where I think it'll be utilized a lot, not just by city staff, but hopefully, others. And that's the one where I'm like, I want to get more feedback. I want to get that one right. I know we'll do a good job on all of them, but that's the one to me. It's not so formulaic, so it creates the more intriguing questions than what my second story setbacks are going to be or something like that.
Interesting. When do you expect that document to be finished? The HAP.
So right now we're anticipating that the development code and the design standards will go conjoined together to city council. You might start seeing public drafts of the documents by summer, fall of next year. We anticipate that to go first. And then we're anticipating to join the housing element update with the housing action plan. And again, the action plans will go with the housing plan. We anticipate that to follow shortly after for a winter approval by city council. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. So we will join those two documents together and seek approval definitely by winter of next year. But I mean, that's the HAP again. It's not a new policy or standards document. It's the glue between all our documents right now. So if you asked a housing question, you might have to rely on 8 different sources for how to build that housing type. The HAP is the one that pulls it all together in a linear format. So
Wow.
we'll see. A lot of work.
Very exciting, though. Exciting and important work that you're doing. So I think that's about all the time we have for questions. If you did ask a question, thank you so much. Hopefully you'll tune into one of our future Talk to Downtowns and we'll be able to get to your question if we didn't today. At this time, I would just like to say thank you so much, Matt, for being our guest. We learned a lot about the work that you've been doing at advanced planning and how all of the pieces work together. So this was a nice end cap to all of the other meetings we had with Tristian, Cynthia, now we've had you to kind of get a really nice overview of the great work that you're doing. So I really appreciate your time. And I also want to say thank you to the audience for tuning in. Matt, do you have any last things that you'd like to share with our viewers? Anything you'd like them to know about the work that you're doing, or just any closing comments?
Thanks for having me, Courtney. I really appreciate spreading the word on this one. You know, we've got a lot of outreach, so we're trying to touch as many people as we can. Spread the word for everybody here. Again, go Shape Stockton on our website. That's our one-stop shop for everything. And, you know, if you have an issue contacting me or someone in my team or anybody at the city, by all means, shoot us an email. Our doors are always open. And we're willing to accept any question, comment. You know, we are the focal point, so nothing's off the table in terms of you getting a hold or asking questions.
Amazing. So if you guys have questions, feedback, get in touch with Matt. It may help them shape the policy documents that they're working so hard on. So with that, I just remind everyone that this video has been streaming live to YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, where we are at Downtown Stockton. It was also streaming live to Twitter, where we are at Downtown STKN. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you so much, Matt, for being here. And with that, I would just like to say, have a great day downtown.